In this lesson, we'll learn how to begin working towards integrating our midground elements into our image. All right, great. So in the previous lesson, we left off with blending our water together, and we talked a little bit about how these vegetation clumps really aren't blending as well as they could into our image. And the first thing I want to attack is this one on the left. This is going to be the easy one right out of the gate. So zooming in and looking at this area of vegetation, it kind of leaves off right about here. So what I'd like to do is maybe paint in this area so that it kind of disappears in behind the sign a little bit. It feels kind of awkward that it kind of almost suspends up into the air right there. So let me go ahead and jump over to my layers panel, and I'll just make a new layer here, and we'll just call this something like, let's just call this midground paint. And I'll go ahead and grab my brush. And let's just go ahead and grab this leaves too. It seems to be a pretty solid do-it-all type of leaf brush. And what I'd like to do here is let's just come in and sample some of these colors around this area so that we can come in and begin to apply color to this area. Now, thinking about kind of the shadow that's probably going to run along the shoreline here. And we'll get some of these other colors in as well. Let's make sure my opacity is set at 100%. Maybe sample some from this tree here. Some from this lighter green where this grass is down below. So you can see we're basically just kind of connecting this area in. If we need to, we could always come in, and I believe that is our left, yes. We can come in and use our eraser along with that leaves brush to maybe shave a little bit off this area right here. Just sort of like that. Then we'll jump back over here to our midground paint again, and let's go ahead and sample some of this. Maybe bring in some darker values a little higher. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I may paint on that a little bit more here in just a little bit. I think for right now, until we get some color correction on our image, I don't want to spend too much time adjusting color because it's all going to change anyways. So let's come in here, maybe get a little bit of this darker value. There we go. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with kind of the extension of that vegetation. So that's one method of beginning to blend these elements into the image a little bit better, is adding some paint where it's needed. Now, another way is we have to think about what the atmosphere does to these elements as they get further away. Let's take a look at these mountains up here. This is a really good example. Now, these mountains are covered with vegetation, but you can't really see that vegetation. You can see sort of silhouettes of little clumps of it, but you can't see by any means what's a tree and what's a bush or leaves on these things. So we have a lot of detail in both of these foreground elements, and probably really too much detail. As a matter of fact, if you zoom in and look at this, this is really, really crisp. This looks like it's right in front of us. So let's go ahead and take some steps to repair that or fix that. We'll just come over here to our midground right. I'm going to select this layer right here, which is our actual pixels, and I'd like to apply a blur selectively to this area of foliage. So one way to do this without damaging these pixels is to come over here and just simply right-click on that layer, and I want to convert that to a smart object. So a smart object simply is preserving the contents of that layer in its current form so that we can come in and apply a Gaussian blur on top of this layer by coming over here to Filter and then Blur. And what happens here, let me just drag this up. I'm going to put a good size blur on that. That's about a 3.2 pixel. I might even go, let's go to 3.5. See what that looks like. Yeah, that's pretty intense. So now that's obviously way too blurred. But at the furthest back portion of this tree, maybe back here in this back corner, it might not be too blurred for that. So, but the beautiful thing about this is what we're using to do this is referred to as a smart filter. It's a smart filter because we've applied it to a smart object here. And you can see that down here below our layer, we have this word smart filter, and then we have our Gaussian blur. Now, we also have the luxury of having a mask here. So right now it's by default showing the entirety of that Gaussian blur, but let's do this. Let's go ahead and fill it with our foreground color here. So we'll just come up to Edit and Fill. Let's choose Foreground Color. Now I do have my mask selected, and what we've done now is we've hidden the entirety of that Gaussian blur. So now what we can do is we can grab a brush and we can selectively reveal that blur. Now this soft round opacity might be a good option as far as brushes. You might also try this airbrush soft round. I'm going to go with that one. Now what I can do here is begin to bring in white into my mask. So that's my background color. I'll hit X to move that to my foreground, and let's just start to slowly paint this in. Now I'm painting with 100% opacity. I'm pressing pretty hard, so we're bringing it in really, really quickly. Let's do this. Instead, we'll come over here and set our opacity to something like 30%. And I'm going to make sure that my opacity is governed by my pressure-sensitive tablet by clicking on that. And I'm just going to lightly start to feather in some of this Gaussian blur. See how that's starting to add a little bit of depth to that, that bit of foliage? So I'm going to add quite a bit of blur to portions of this. As a matter of fact, I'd like to blur all of it just a little bit. Let me come in here and maybe get the treetops. Overall, it is not definitely within, I'd say, 5 or 10 feet from us. It's hard to gauge that just because we have we're working on an image, but it's definitely not that close to us. So now we can switch back and forth between black and white simply by hitting that X key if we maybe blur one portion a little too much. We're just going to come in and selectively start kind of blurring this and pushing it back into the back of the midground. Now, if you'd like to see kind of the effect, or at least the mask itself, we can always come over here and alt-click on our mask, and you can see where I've painted into that mask. So you can alt-click and go right back. I'm going to continue blurring this out just by painting in, but I don't want to spend a whole lot of time doing this. Again, this can be something that you can nitpick for quite some time. Basically, it's getting it to a point where you're happy with it. So let's come in and just run a quick pass over the rest of this here. Make my brush larger. So you can see here, I'm not painting a lot of gray into the image, just a bit. And already that's starting to be pushed back just a little bit. There's obviously some work to be done on it even yet, but again, I'll work on that a little bit in between lessons, because what I want to show you to wrap things up is another problem that this midground element has in terms of really seeming to fit into this environment. So we've got this big clump of vegetation here, but it seems to be really isolated here. Now, if nature is overtaking this city and it's growing over the concrete and really just kind of spreading, then it's not going to spread in clumps like this. We're going to have little pieces that are starting to grow through maybe some of these cracks in the pavement. You're going to have little pieces that have poked up away from the main bodies of vegetation. So if we zoom in and look at this image, you can see there's cracks in the pavement in areas that we can work with, but what I've done is very similar to the water, and what we're going to do is we're going to pick up in the next lesson and use this. But if you come up here to our midground blending group, I've created that inside our photo foliage group here, and I've got here a single layer just called blocking. There we go. And let's actually pull our midground paint layer into this layer. And you can see what I've done is very similar to the water. I've just simply come in with a black brush and I've blocked in some areas where I'd like to add vegetation. A few areas along the water line here, some areas around these road signs, and even some areas in the extreme foreground here and into the background a little bit. So what I'd like to do in the next lesson is pick up where we're leaving off here and begin to fill in the gaps with some of these areas with photographic vegetation. So we'll do that in the next lesson.